Lieutenant Sarah Bennett pressed her eye against the spotting scope, scanning the rocky hillside above the narrow canyon. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on her position, turning the inside of her ghillie suit into an oven. She had been lying motionless in the same spot for 6 hours, watching, waiting, and doing the job she had trained her entire adult life to do. Below her position, roughly 800 yards to the northwest, a 12-man Navy SEAL team was moving through what intelligence called a low-risk corridor. Sarah knew better. She had studied these mountains for 3 weeks straight, mapping every cave, every ridge, every place an enemy could hide. And what she had found made her blood run cold. "Overwatch 1 to ground team," she whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible. "I have movement on the ridgeline, multiple positions. You need to halt your advance." The response came through her earpiece, sharp and dismissive. "Ground team to Overwatch. Negative. Intelligence shows this area is clear. Continue observation only. Do not interfere with mission progress." Sarah gritted her teeth. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Derek Hayes, the SEAL team leader. She had met him exactly once 3 weeks ago when she had been assigned to this operation. The meeting had not gone well. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Hayes had said, not bothering to hide the smirk on his face, "we don't really need a babysitter on this op. My men have done this 100 times." "I'm not a babysitter, Commander," Sarah had replied evenly. "I'm your Overwatch. My job is to see what you can't see and keep you alive." Hayes had looked her up and down, taking in her compact 5'6" frame, and laughed. "Look, sweetheart, I get that the Army is trying to put women in combat roles now, but maybe start with something easier than sniper school. This is serious work." The other SEALs had chuckled. Sarah had felt her face flush hot, but she kept her expression neutral. "I graduated top of my class at sniper school, Commander, and I've completed 2 combat deployments with confirmed kills. I'm here because I'm good at my job." "Sure you are," Hayes had said, turning away. "Just try to keep up and stay out of our way." That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Sarah had been invisible to the SEAL team. They took her intel reports and filed them away without reading them. They ignored her warnings. They treated her like a secretary who happened to carry a rifle. Now, as she watched enemy fighters moving into position along the ridgeline, Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She keyed her radio again. "Ground team, this is Overwatch 1. I have positive identification of at least 15 enemy combatants taking up positions along your route. They are setting up an ambush. You need to extract immediately." "Overwatch 1, you are not in command of this operation," Hayes's voice came back, irritated now. "If you can't handle observation duty without panicking, maybe you should." "Commander, I am looking at armed hostiles right now. They have RPGs and heavy machine guns. If you continue forward, they will have you in a kill box." There was a long pause. Then Hayes came back on, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but our intelligence is solid. You're probably looking at locals, civilians, maybe some goat herders. We train for this. Your support staff. Let us do our jobs." Support staff. The word stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. She had spent 5 years fighting for the right to be here, enduring doubt and discrimination at every turn. Her father had been a Marine sniper in Vietnam. Her grandfather had been at Normandy. The Bennett family had served in every American war since the Revolution. When Sarah had announced she wanted to join the Army, her mother had cried. When she said she wanted to be a sniper, her father had pulled her aside. "Sarah," he had said quietly, "I support you, but you need to understand what you're walking into. The military is changing, but not fast enough. You're going to face men who think you don't belong, men who will dismiss you, mock you, wait for you to fail." "I know, Dad," she had replied, "but I'm a Bennett, we don't quit." He had smiled at that. "No, we don't, so you go show them what a Bennett can do." That conversation had been 8 years ago. Sarah had shown them. She had outshot men twice her size. She had endured crude jokes and hostile instructors. She had graduated at the top of her class, just like she had told Hayes, and she had proven herself in combat, saving lives and completing missions that others said were impossible. But none of it seemed to matter, because here she was, watching disaster unfold in real time, and no one would listen. Sarah made a decision. She adjusted her position slightly, bringing her rifle, a custom M24 sniper weapon system, into alignment. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters clearly now. They were not goat herders. They were experienced Taliban fighters, and they were moving with practiced efficiency. The SEAL team continued advancing up the canyon. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Sarah's mind raced. She could see at least 4 RPG positions, 2 heavy machine gun nests, and probably a dozen riflemen spread along the high ground. The SEALs would walk right into the middle of it. At that range, in that terrain, it would be a massacre. She keyed her radio one more time. "Ground team, this is Overwatch 1. Final warning, you are walking into an ambush. I have eyes on multiple." "Overwatch 1, shut it down," Hayes snapped. "You're compromising our communications. If I hear from you again without a valid threat, I'm filing a formal complaint when we get back to base. Do you understand?" Sarah's jaw tightened. A valid threat. She was looking at a valid threat right now. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I understand." She clicked off her radio and settled behind her rifle. If Hayes wouldn't listen, she would have to act, but she would need to be smart about it. Firing her weapon would give away her position. It would also mean disobeying a direct order from a superior officer. In the military, that could mean court-martial. It could mean the end of her career. But if she did nothing, 12 good men would die in the next few minutes. Sarah had been 9 years old when her father sat her down and told her what it meant to be a soldier. "There will come a time," he had said, "when you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. Most of the time they're the same thing, but sometimes they're not. When that moment comes, you look into your heart and you make the hard choice. You live with the consequences. That's what separates a soldier from a warrior." This was that moment. Sarah exhaled slowly, letting her heart rate settle. She had one advantage the enemy didn't know about. She was invisible up here in the rocks, camouflaged perfectly. She could take out a few key targets before they even knew where the shots were coming from. Below, the SEAL team rounded a bend in the canyon. They were now fully exposed, right where the enemy wanted them. On the ridgeline, Sarah saw an enemy fighter raise his hand, preparing to give the signal to fire. She centered her crosshairs on the nearest RPG position, 750 yards, light crosswind from the east, minimal elevation adjustment needed. "Forgive me, Dad," she whispered. The RPG gunner on the eastern ridge never knew what hit him. Sarah's first shot caught him in the upper chest, and he crumpled backward into the rocks. Before his body stopped moving, she had already chambered another round and shifted targets. The second RPG position was slightly farther, nearly 800 yards. Sarah compensated for the distance and the wind, then squeezed the trigger. Another perfect shot. The gunner dropped. Now the enemy fighters were confused. They had heard the shots, but they couldn't identify where they were coming from. Sarah was shooting from a completely different angle than they expected, from higher ground they had assumed was impassable. In the canyon below, the SEALs had finally realized what was happening. Sarah could hear Hayes shouting orders over the radio, his voice no longer condescending but sharp with urgency. The team had taken cover behind a cluster of boulders, but they were still pinned down. The remaining enemy fighters had opened fire, and rounds were ricocheting off the rocks around the SEAL position. Sarah worked methodically, years of training taking over. She identified the heavy machine gun nest on the northern ridge and put 2 rounds through the gun shield. One of the gunners went down. The other scrambled for cover. But there were too many of them. For every target she eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear. And now some of the enemy fighters had spotted the dust kicked up by her muzzle blast. Rounds began cracking against the rocks near her position. Sarah rolled to her left, moving to a new firing position she had prepared days earlier. She had known this spot might become hot. A good sniper always had an escape route. From her new position, she could see the full scope of the ambush. There were at least 20 enemy fighters now, maybe more. They had the high ground in superior numbers. The SEALs were good, very good, but they were trapped in a kill box with no way out. Sarah's radio crackled. "Overwatch 1, what is your status?" It was Hayes, and for the first time he sounded uncertain. "Still here, Commander," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the bullets snapping past her position. "And I'm going to get you out of this." "We've got wounded," Hayes said. "2 men down. We need immediate air support." "Air support is 20 minutes out," Sarah replied. She had already checked with command. "I'll keep them off you until help arrives." "Roger that," Hayes said. Then after a pause, "Overwatch, thank you." Sarah didn't respond. She was already lining up her next shot. The enemy fighters were getting smarter now. They had figured out roughly where she was, and they were concentrating fire on her position. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of incoming rifle rounds, the whine of ricochets. A chunk of rock exploded inches from her face, and she felt a sharp sting as a fragment cut her cheek. She ignored it. Pain was just information. Right now she had a job to do. Sarah shifted her focus to the enemy commander. She had identified him 10 minutes earlier, a tall man with a distinctive red scarf, directing fighters from a protected position on the western ridge. Take him out, and the rest would lose coordination. But he was smart. He stayed in cover, only exposing himself for seconds at a time. Sarah would need to time this perfectly. She watched his pattern. Every 30 seconds he would pop up to give orders, then duck back down. She could work with that. Sarah controlled her breathing, counting down the seconds. 25, 26, 27. The man rose up. Sarah fired. The commander spun and fell. Immediately the enemy fire became less organized. Fighters were shouting, confused. Some began to retreat. But the fight was far from over. Sarah's radio crackled again. This time it was command. "Overwatch 1, be advised that ground team is requesting immediate evacuation. Can you provide covering fire for extraction?" "Affirmative," Sarah replied. "But they'll need to move fast. I'm running low on ammunition." It was true. She had started the day with 50 rounds. She was down to less than 20, and every shot had to count. "Ground team is moving in 2 minutes," command replied. "Air support is now 10 minutes out. Can you hold?" Sarah looked at the battlefield below. The enemy was regrouping, bringing up reinforcements. She could see vehicles moving up the far ridge. More fighters, more guns. "I can hold," she said quietly. What she didn't say was that holding this position might cost her life. The SEAL team began their extraction, moving in a tactical retreat down the canyon. Sarah provided covering fire, dropping targets with mechanical precision. Each shot bought the SEALs a few more seconds, a few more yards. But the enemy was pressing harder now. They had realized the SEALs were trying to escape, and they were determined not to let them. Sarah fired her last 3 rounds in quick succession, taking out a fighter with an RPG who was lining up on the retreating SEALs. Her rifle clicked empty. She dropped the weapon and pulled her sidearm, a standard-issue M9 pistol. It was nearly useless at this range, but it was all she had left. The enemy fighters were advancing on her position now. She could see them moving up the hillside, using the rocks for cover. They knew she was up here somewhere, and they were coming to finish the job. Sarah checked her ammunition. 2 magazines, 30 rounds total, against at least a dozen enemy fighters. She smiled grimly. Her father had once told her that being a Bennett meant never giving up, even when the odds were impossible, especially when the odds were impossible. She keyed her radio one last time. "Ground team, this is Overwatch 1. You're clear for extraction. Air support will cover you from here." "Negative, Overwatch." Hayes's voice came back immediately. "We're not leaving you up there." "Commander, you have wounded. Get them to safety. That's an order." "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're not in my chain of command," Hayes said. And then, surprisingly, he added, "And I'm not leaving a soldier behind. We're coming for you." Sarah felt something unexpected, a warmth in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Acceptance, respect. But she also knew the truth. If the SEALs tried to reach her position, they would all die. The enemy was too close, too many. The terrain was too rough. "Negative, ground team," she said firmly. "Complete your extraction, I'll be fine." It was a lie, they both knew it. But before Hayes could respond, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps on the rocks behind her. Close, too close. She spun around, bringing her pistol up. 3 enemy fighters were less than 20 feet away, their rifles aimed directly at her. Sarah's mind went calm and clear. This was it, the end of the road. But she was a Bennett, and Bennetts went down fighting. Sarah fired twice, dropping the first fighter before he could pull his trigger. She dove to her right as the other 2 opened fire, bullets cracking through the space where she had just been standing. She rolled behind a boulder and came up shooting, her rounds forcing the enemy fighters to take cover. But she was cornered now. More fighters were coming up the hillside. She could hear their voices, their footsteps. She had maybe 30 seconds before they surrounded her position completely. Sarah checked her ammunition, 8 rounds left. She thought about her father, about her mother, about every person who had ever told her she wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough, didn't belong. She thought about Hayes and his condescending smirk 3 weeks ago. And then she thought about those 12 SEALs down in the canyon, the men she had sworn to protect. She had done her job. They would make it out. That was what mattered. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to make her last stand. Then she heard it, a sound that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard in her life. The deep, unmistakable whump-whump-whump of helicopter rotors. Air support had arrived early. An Apache attack helicopter came screaming over the ridgeline, its chain gun already firing. The enemy fighters scattered, diving for cover as 30mm rounds tore into the hillside. A second helicopter appeared, then a third. Sarah's radio erupted with voices. "Overwatch 1, this is air support. We have you on visual. Stay down and mark your position with smoke." Sarah pulled a smoke grenade from her vest and popped it. Orange smoke billowed into the sky, marking her location. The Apache circled like deadly hawks, their weapons systematically eliminating the enemy fighters. The Taliban forces broke and ran, retreating into the mountain caves. 20 minutes later, a Black Hawk helicopter touched down on a flat area 50 yards from Sarah's position. A SEAL team member jumped out and ran toward her, staying low. It was Hayes. He reached her position, breathing hard, and looked her over. "Are you hit?" Sarah shook her head. "Just a scratch." She touched her cheek where the rock fragment had cut her. "How are your men?" "2 wounded, but they'll make it, thanks to you." Hayes extended his hand. "We need to get you out of here. Can you move?" Sarah took his hand and stood. Her legs were stiff from 6 hours of lying motionless, but she could walk. Hayes kept his hand on her elbow, steadying her as they moved toward the helicopter. They climbed aboard and the Black Hawk lifted off immediately. As they gained altitude, Sarah looked down at the battlefield. She could see her old sniper position, the rocks where she had made her stand. She could see the enemy bodies scattered across the ridgeline. She had done it. She had saved them all. Hayes sat down next to her, pulling off his helmet. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you about 100 apologies." Sarah met his eyes. "Just one will do." I was wrong, Hayes said simply. About you, about this whole operation. You tried to warn us and I didn't listen. I didn't listen because— He paused, clearly struggling with the words. Because I didn't want to believe that you might know something I didn't, that you might be better at something than me. Pride, Sarah said. Yeah, pride, stupid, dangerous pride. Hayes shook his head. My pride almost got my entire team killed today. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't disobeyed my direct orders. I did what any soldier would do, Sarah said. No, Hayes replied firmly. You did what a great soldier would do. You made the hard call. You put our lives ahead of your career. He extended his hand again. Lieutenant Bennett, it's an honor to serve with you. Sarah shook his hand. The honor is mine, Commander. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. When they landed, word had already spread about what had happened. Soldiers lined the runway, watching as the helicopters touched down. As Sarah climbed out of the Black Hawk, she saw Colonel Morrison, the base commander, waiting for her. Her stomach tightened. This was it, the court-martial, the end of her career. Morrison walked up to her, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Bennett, my office, now. Sarah followed him across the base, her heart pounding. Hayes walked beside her. I'll testify on your behalf, he said quietly. I'll tell them everything. This was my fault, not yours. I appreciate that, Commander, Sarah replied. But I made the choice. I'll accept the consequences. Morrison's office was a small, sparse room with a desk, 2 chairs, and an American flag in the corner. He sat down behind his desk and gestured for Sarah to sit. Hayes stood by the door. Lieutenant Bennett, Morrison began, you disobeyed a direct order from a superior officer in the field. Yes, sir, Sarah said. You opened fire without authorization, revealing your position and potentially compromising the mission. Yes, sir. Morrison leaned back in his chair. And in doing so, you saved the lives of 12 Navy SEALs who would otherwise be dead right now. Sarah blinked, sir. Morrison opened a folder on his desk. I've reviewed the after-action reports. I've spoken with Commander Hayes and his team. I've looked at your intelligence assessments from the past 3 weeks, the ones that were filed but apparently never read. He looked up at her. You were right about everything, Lieutenant. The enemy positions, the ambush, the threat level. You tried to warn us and we didn't listen. Sir, I still disobeyed. Morrison held up a hand. You made a split-second decision in combat to save American lives. That's not disobedience. That's initiative. That's exactly what we train our soldiers to do. He closed the folder. Lieutenant Bennett, I'm recommending you for the Silver Star for gallantry in action. Sarah's mouth fell open. Sir, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Morrison replied. Your actions spoke for you. He stood up and extended his hand. Well done, soldier. Sarah shook his hand, still trying to process what was happening. Behind her, Hayes was grinning. As they left the office, Hayes turned to her. So, Lieutenant Bennett, my team is shipping out again in 3 weeks. We're going to need an Overwatch sniper, someone who knows what they're doing, someone we can trust. He paused. Think you might be interested? Sarah smiled. I think I might be, Commander. Good, Hayes said. But this time we do things differently. This time when our Overwatch tells us something, we listen. That sounds like a good policy, Sarah agreed. 3 weeks later, Sarah deployed again with the SEAL team, but everything was different now. Hayes introduced her to his men not as support staff, but as a vital member of the team. They read her intelligence reports. They asked for her input. They treated her with the respect she had earned. On the night before their first mission, Hayes pulled her aside. I've been thinking about what happened that day in the canyon, he said, and I realized something. You didn't just save our lives. You taught us something important. What's that? Sarah asked. That being a warrior isn't about being the biggest or the strongest or the loudest, Hayes said. It's about being the one who makes the hard choices when it matters. It's about doing the right thing even when everyone tells you you're wrong. He smiled. My father was a SEAL. My grandfather was a Marine at Iwo Jima. They taught me that the military was about tradition, about doing things the way they've always been done. But you taught me that real tradition is about honoring the values, not the methods. It's about adapting, getting better, being open to change. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you, Commander. That means a lot. Call me Derek, he said. We're a team now. The mission went flawlessly. Sarah provided overwatch, and the SEALs listened to every word she said. They extracted without a single casualty. 6 months later, Sarah received her Silver Star in a ceremony attended by her entire family. Her father pinned the medal to her uniform, tears running down his weathered face. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "You're a Bennett, you never gave up." "No, Dad," Sarah replied, hugging him tight. "I never did." The story of what happened in that canyon spread through the military. Sarah became a symbol, proof that courage and competence had nothing to do with gender. Young women wrote to her, telling her she was their inspiration. They wanted to be snipers too. They wanted to serve their country. Sarah answered every letter. She told them the truth, that it would be hard, that they would face doubt and discrimination, that there would be moments when they wanted to quit. But she also told them that it was worth it, that they belonged, that they could do anything if they refused to give up. 2 years later, Sarah was promoted to captain. She was assigned to train the next generation of military snipers, both men and women. On her first day as an instructor, she stood before a class of 30 students and told them about the day in the canyon. "I was dismissed, mocked, and ignored," she said. "But I didn't let that stop me from doing my job. Because being a soldier isn't about getting respect. It's about earning respect through your actions. It's about making the hard choices. It's about protecting the person next to you, even if that person doesn't believe you belong." She looked at the young women in her class. "Some of you will face people who doubt you, who think you can't do this. Prove them wrong, not with words but with excellence. Be so good at what you do that they have no choice but to acknowledge it." And they did. Under Sarah's leadership, dozens of women graduated from sniper school and went on to distinguished careers. The military changed, slowly but surely, becoming more inclusive and more effective. Sarah Bennett had done more than save 12 lives that day in the canyon. She had helped change the culture of the American military. She had opened doors that had been closed for generations. And she had proven what her father had always known, that being a Bennett meant never giving up, no matter how impossible the odds. 20 years later, now a colonel, Sarah returned to that same base in Afghanistan. She stood on the hillside where she had made her stand, where she had fired those desperate shots that changed everything. The rocks were still there, the canyon was unchanged, but everything else was different. Sarah thought about that young lieutenant who had lain in these rocks, terrified and alone, choosing duty over safety. She thought about Hayes and his team, about the men she had saved. She thought about all the young women who had followed in her footsteps. And she smiled, because she had done what Bennetts do. She had faced the impossible and refused to surrender. She had made her family proud. And she had proven that true strength isn't about size or gender or tradition. It's about courage. It's about heart. It's about making the hard choice when everything is on the line. Sarah Bennett had made that choice.